Hello everyone, and welcome back to the North Somerset Educational Psychology Service online training library. This is the first video in a two-part series on trauma and adverse childhood experiences, sometimes also known as ACEs. The series will include a mix of theory and practice. Firstly, I'll talk about what trauma is, how it affects young children, and then in part 2, what we can do in preschools, schools, and colleges to help. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge that the topic of early trauma can bring up deep and sometimes sad memories, whether they're personal or professional. I'll try to treat it with the seriousness it deserves, but there's no intention to cause distress. Please look after yourself and step away if you need to. Let's start by looking at this word, trauma. We all have a personal definition of trauma, and it will bring through different thoughts and associations in our minds. I'm starting here because it's just useful to highlight how many different perspectives there are on a topic like this and the assumptions we make when we hear the word trauma. We might define trauma by the types of adverse events that a child experiences, or we might define it as any event that overwhelms a child's sense of safety, whether short or long term. But the key thing is, it's not just about how serious an event or situation seems to an outsider, it's the child's personal experience of it, and in particular, how much help or safety a child feels is being provided by the people caring for them. Let's move on from looking at what we mean by trauma or ACEs and think about the impact on children, starting with the impact on their brain. During infancy, brain growth is at its most rapid. It's fastest in the womb and gradually slows down by age 10 or so when it's pretty much full size. During their first 2 years, babies' brains are forming 1 million new neural connections every second. But trauma affects how brains grow, and in particular, it disrupts the development of stress systems, which means that connections are concentrated in fight or flight areas of the brain. Trauma also affects learning, because when we're stressed, we tend to store memories in the subconscious, which is a kind of psychological self-defense mechanism. However, it's important to say here that although trauma affects the brain in a major way, the brain is a very resilient thing. We can make new connections, learn skills, and develop new habits right into old age. If children experience trauma in their early life, they are working out or strengthening or feeding the areas of their brain that handle stress. This can become like a habit or a deep pattern of responding to the world. And in some rarer cases, children become so fearful that they learn it is safest to withdraw and shut down, to avoid expressing needs or feelings because something bad or scary usually happens afterwards. When children have learned that the world is unsafe, their behaviour usually tells the story. They might be impulsive, struggle with change, or find it very hard to separate from adults. And what's really common is known as hypervigilance, which is a constant state of threat detection, which can look like a lack of concentration, but it's not. It's a survival response. And one of the biggest effects of trauma is on relationships, especially relationships with caregivers and authority figures, which is known as our attachment. Traumas can make it difficult for children to trust others. Some may cling tightly to adults, others may push people away. Both are protective strategies, ways of keeping themselves safe. Because so much energy is going into survival, children may find it harder to focus on play and learning. We sometimes see delays in language, play, or problem solving, not because the child isn't capable, but because their brains are preoccupied with staying safe. Trauma doesn't just affect emotions and behaviour, it can also show up physically. It affects sleep, leads us to pick up more bugs and infections, and often causes delay in motor skills by reducing children's confidence to explore the world around them. Okay, let's finish off this introduction with a summary, which is basically that early trauma affects the whole child, how they think, feel, and interact. It doesn't always look the same for every child, but by observing children over time, we might see patterns that tell us about an underlying need which is related to scary or traumatic experiences in their early life. I should add, obviously, that not all of these examples are definitive proof of trauma. Most of the time, kids are just kids. They test the boundaries, they do weird and unpredictable things, they make mistakes, they push our buttons, they get ill and distracted and refuse to sleep. This presentation isn't about diagnosing trauma or looking for it everywhere we turn. It's about having the awareness that it's one possible explanation for what we see in our settings, and if we have evidence that trauma is indeed a factor in a child's life experiences, we need to think about what we can do to help them move forward. So, thank you for watching, and please stick around for the second video in this series, which is about what we can do to support children that have suffered adverse childhood experiences and early trauma.